The silence was the first thing I had built. Before the furniture, before the job, before the life I now called my own, there was the silence. It was a tangible thing, a foundation poured from equal parts exhaustion and resolve. For 3 years, it had been my sanctuary. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, my only companion on nights like this. The drone of a mindless documentary, a lullaby for a mind that once never slept. Tonight, the quiet was particularly deep. A Tuesday in early autumn, the air outside carried a chill that made the warmth of my small apartment feel like a hard-won victory. I was slouched on the gray sectional, a fleece blanket pooled around my waist, my focus drifting in and out of a program about deep-sea ecosystems. The narrator's voice was a low, monotonous drone, and my eyelids felt heavy. This was my peace, orderly, predictable, safe. Then the doorbell rang. It wasn't a gentle chime. It was a shrill digital shriek that pierced the tranquility, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. My entire body jolted, the lazy comfort of the evening instantly replaced by a jolt of ice-cold adrenaline. My heart, which had been beating a slow, steady rhythm, kicked into a frantic, panicked gallop against my ribs. I never got unexpected visitors, ever. My life was curated to prevent such things. My circle was small, consisting of a handful of colleagues who knew my boundaries, and Claire, who was currently 2 states away visiting her sister. Anyone who knew me knew to call first, always. Annoyance was the first emotion to surface, a hot wave that washed over the initial shock. Who in God's name would show up unannounced at 9 o'clock at night? I swung my legs off the couch, the floorboards cold beneath my bare feet. As I walked towards the door, a different feeling began to creep in, something heavier and more sinister than simple irritation. It was a prickle of unease at the back of my neck, the ghost of a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to experience in years, dread. Something was wrong. The very air in the apartment felt charged, the silence now ringing with a tense, expectant energy. My hand hesitated for a moment before I reached for the door. I took a deep, steadying breath, my knuckles brushing against the cool metal of the peephole. I leaned forward, pressing one eye to the small, distorted lens, my breath fogging the brass, and the world stopped turning. Time, memory, and the carefully constructed walls of my new life crumbled to dust in a single, heart-stopping second. On the other side of my door, haloed by the dim yellow light of the apartment hallway, stood Nora. It was her. 3 years had passed, but there was no mistaking her. Her hair was shorter, cut in a practical bob that framed her face, instead of the long, wild waves I remembered, and there were faint lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But the eyes themselves, they were the same. The same impossible shade of hazel, a swirling mix of green and gold that could look warm and inviting one moment and coolly defiant the next. Right now, they looked lost, haunted. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back from the door, my hand flying to my chest as if to physically keep my heart from bursting out. Nora, here, at my door. In this city, on this street, outside this specific apartment that I had chosen precisely because it was 1,000 miles and a lifetime away from her. How? The question screamed through my mind, a frantic, desperate shriek. How in the hell did she find me? For a long, dizzying moment, I considered not answering. I could retreat back to the couch, turn off the lights, and pretend I wasn't home. I could wait until she gave up and walked away, disappearing back into the past where she belonged. But I knew Nora. Her tenacity, once a quality I had admired, was a force of nature. If she had gone to the trouble of tracking me down after all this time, after the scorched earth policy of my departure, she wasn't going to be deterred by a dark apartment. She would wait. She would come back. This wasn't an ending, it was a siege. And my fortress, my quiet, orderly sanctuary, had just had its gate kicked in. A wave of bitter resignation washed over me. This was happening. The past I had outrun for 3 years had finally caught up. With a sigh that felt like it was dredged up from the very bottom of my soul, I stepped forward. My hand trembled as I unhooked the safety chain. The metallic click sounded unnaturally loud in the silence, a sound of surrender. I turned the deadbolt, the heavy thunk echoing the final, heavy beat of my old life. I pulled the door open just a crack, leaving my body to block most of the entrance. The hallway light spilled onto my floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I kept my face in the shadow. "What the hell do you want?" I growled. The voice that came out of me was rougher, harsher than I'd intended, the voice of a stranger. It was the voice of the man I had become, not the man she had married. Her hazel eyes, wide and luminous in the dim light, locked onto mine. She flinched, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but she stood her ground. A gust of cold hallway air swirled around my legs, carrying with it a scent that hit me like a physical blow. It was her perfume, the same light, floral scent she'd worn on our first date, the scent that had once meant home, passion, and safety. Now it just smelled like betrayal. "To talk to you, Caleb," she said softly, her voice trembling just enough for me to notice. It was the same voice that had once whispered promises in my ear, the same voice I had heard in my nightmares. "Please, I need to explain." A laugh, sharp and devoid of any humor, barked out of me. "Explain?" I repeated, the word dripping with 3 years of stored-up venom. "You can't be serious. I think the way I left should have told you that I had no interest in ever seeing you again, let alone talking to you." Her expression crumpled, the pain in her eyes so raw and immediate it was almost shocking. "I have no idea why you left," she said, a hint of desperation coloring her words. "I came home, and you were just gone. No note, nothing. Just all your things vanished." I stared at her, my mind reeling in disbelief. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of that statement sent a fresh surge of white-hot anger through me. How dare she? How dare she stand there, on my doorstep, after all this time, and play the innocent? "You can't be serious," I repeated, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "How could you possibly not know why? You're out of your mind if you think I would have stuck around after what you did. I know you heard me, Nora. I know you heard what I said would happen if you walked out that door that night." Her brow furrowed in genuine confusion, and for a split second, her bewilderment almost looked real. "Caleb, please," she begged, taking a small step forward. "Can I come in? We can't talk about this in a hallway. We need to really talk." Every instinct, every fiber of my being was screaming at me to slam the door in her face, to bolt it, chain it, and push the couch in front of it. To protect this life, this fragile piece I had built from the ashes of the one she had burned down. But a small, traitorous part of me, a part I thought I had excised and buried long ago, was curious. What possible explanation could she have? What lie had she spent 3 years concocting that she thought was convincing enough to bring her here? The morbid curiosity was a hook, and it was already sinking into my flesh. I needed to hear it. I needed to hear the lie so I could throw it back in her face and finally, have the last word. "Fine," I grumbled, my voice tight with resentment. I stepped back, pulling the door open wider. The gesture felt like a concession, a defeat. I suppose I'd best get this over with. As Nora walked past me, a small, hesitant figure swallowed by the shadows of my apartment, that perfume washed over me again. Jasmine and sandalwood. For a brutal, unwelcome moment, I wasn't standing in my sterile, minimalist apartment in a city she shouldn't know. I was 25 again, fumbling with the keys to my beat-up car after our first dinner, the scent of her perfume filling the small space, my heart hammering with a hope so bright, it felt like it could light up the world. I shook my head violently, as if to physically dislodge the memory. The past was a ghost, and I would not let it haunt these rooms. She didn't move far into the apartment. She perched on the very edge of my gray sectional, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, looking as out of place as a wildflower in a concrete garden. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the bare walls, the meticulously organized bookshelf, the stark lack of any personal photographs. It was the home of a man with no history, a man in hiding. "Could I have a glass of water?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I nodded, grateful for the excuse to escape, to put some distance between us, even if it was just the 10 feet to the kitchen. I needed a moment to breathe air that wasn't saturated with her presence, with her perfume, with the suffocating weight of our shared history. As I turned my back on her and walked into the small, galley-style kitchen, my hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of the cool quartz countertop, my knuckles turning white. I could feel her presence in the other room like a physical weight, a pressure behind my eyes. I reached for a glass from the cabinet, my movements stiff and automatic. As I held it under the tap, the sound of the rushing water filled the silence. but it couldn't drown out the roaring in my own head. My mind, against my will, was already starting to drift, pulled back by an irresistible tide to the night that had changed everything. The night the silence had been broken for the first time. The night the man I used to be had died, and the man holding this glass of water had been born. I could see it all, as clear and as sharp as if it were happening right now, right on the other side of that wall. The water from the tap was cold, but not as cold as the dread that had pooled in my stomach that night 3 years ago. The memory wasn't hazy or dreamlike. It was sharp and crystalline, each detail etched into my mind with the precision of a diamond cutting glass. As I filled the glass for Nora, I wasn't in my sparse, quiet kitchen anymore. I was back in our home, the one with the worn leather couch and the framed photos on the mantelpiece, standing on the precipice of the end of my world. I had just gotten home from work, a long Friday that had bled into the evening. I remember loosening my tie as I walked through the door, the familiar scent of lemon polish and old books welcoming me. The house was quiet, and I assumed Nora was in the study, reading, or perhaps in the kitchen, experimenting with some new recipes she'd found online. But she was in the living room, and the sight of her stopped me dead in my tracks. She was standing in front of the ornate, gilt-edged mirror that hung over our fireplace, applying a final, perfect slash of crimson lipstick. She wasn't in her usual evening attire of soft sweaters and comfortable jeans. Tonight she was a stranger, a femme fatale sculpted from shadow and silk. She was poured into a little black dress, a sheath of dark silk, so form-fitting it seemed to have been painted onto her skin. It was sleeveless, with a neckline that plunged just low enough to be a promise, and a hemline that climbed high enough on her thighs to be a provocation. Her hair, usually a cascade of casual waves, was swept up in an elegant, intricate knot, exposing the graceful line of her neck. She looked stunning. She looked dangerous. And she looked like she was dressed for someone else. "Are we going out?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow in the suddenly cavernous room. I couldn't remember making any plans. Our Fridays were usually sacred takeout, a bottle of wine, and a movie on the couch. Nora's laugh was light, but it didn't reach her eyes in the reflection. There was a brittle, nervous edge to it. "We don't have plans," she said, blotting her lips with a tissue. "I have a date tonight." The world tilted on its axis. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and alien, a date. It was a word that didn't belong in our vocabulary, in our home. It was a word for single people, for strangers. "A date?" I repeated, my voice a dumb echo of hers. The knot of my tie suddenly felt like a noose. "With who?" "You don't know him," she replied, finally turning away from the mirror to face me. She avoided my gaze, her eyes busily checking the clasp on a delicate silver bracelet. "His name is Marcus. He just started at my company, so hardly anyone knows him yet. He asked me to go to Sabrina's birthday celebration with him. He didn't want to attend alone." Sabrina. The name alone was enough to set my teeth on edge. It landed in the quiet room like a lit match in a gas-filled chamber. Sabrina, Nora's so-called best friend, was a walking, talking catastrophe. 4 divorces under her belt before the age of 35, each one a spectacular implosion caused by her own brazen infidelity. She collected indiscretions like other women collected shoes, leaving a trail of broken men and shattered vows in her wake. I'd never understood what my sweet, loyal Nora saw in a woman so fundamentally amoral. Sabrina's philosophy was simple. If it feels good, do it, and damn the consequences for everyone else. "He does know you're married, doesn't he?" I asked, my voice tight, each word a carefully controlled release of the anger coiling in my gut. Nora shrugged, the gesture infuriatingly casual. The silk of her dress shimmered over her shoulders. "It doesn't matter. Nothing is going to happen between us. Besides," she added, a defensive edge creeping into her tone, "I didn't want to go to Sabrina's party alone, and you won't go with me. So, I told him I'd go with him." I took a deep breath, trying to anchor myself. "You understand why I refuse to go, don't you, Nora? I can't stand being around that woman. Her entire life is a monument to broken promises. And I don't want you interacting with her either. She's poison." Nora's eyes flashed with annoyance. "Get used to it, Caleb. She's been my best friend since first grade. I am not going to turn my back on her just because you don't approve of her lifestyle." "I don't approve of her lifestyle because she's been divorced 4 times, and each time it was because she got caught cheating on her husband." The words exploded out of me, louder than I intended. The carefully maintained dam of my composure had broken. I don't like going to her parties because they're filled with sleazy, single guys looking to score and God knows what else. And now you're telling me that just because she cheats, you're not likely to cheat? Especially now that you're all dressed up for a date with another man? Her face flushed, a deep, mottled red that clashed with her lipstick. That's a horrible thing to say to me, Caleb. No, it isn't, I shot back, taking a step closer. I was operating on pure, gut-level instinct now, the protective, primal part of my brain, screaming that something was terribly wrong. Let's review, shall we? What did you wear to the last two parties at Sabrina's? I'll tell you. You wore slacks and a blouse to one, and jeans and a sweater to the other. There isn't any doubt in my mind as to why you're dressed like this for tonight's party. Sabrina has finally talked you into trying someone else, hasn't she? Nora's silence was a confession. It was all the confirmation I needed. The small nagging fears I'd been suppressing for months, the late nights she claimed were for work, the secretive phone calls she'd take in the other room, the way she'd sometimes pull away when I tried to kiss her, all of them coalesced into one terrible certainty. I continued, my voice dropping low, each word laced with a cold, devastating clarity. I'm not an idiot, Nora. I've overheard snippets of conversations. I know she's been after you for years to join her little parties, to live a little. I guess she's finally gotten what she's been after. You're wrong, Nora insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. It was a weak, flimsy shield against the hard truth of my words. It isn't like that. I stepped closer still, until I was standing right in front of her. I could smell her perfume, that jasmine and sandalwood scent, now feeling like a mockery. My eyes pleaded with her, a last, desperate attempt to pull her back from the edge. It's easy enough to prove me wrong, Nora. Just stay. Stay here with me. For a moment, a flicker of something hesitation, doubt, maybe even regret passed through her eyes. I saw a glimpse of the woman I married, the woman who would have chosen us. But then it was gone, extinguished as quickly as it had appeared. She shook her head, the elegant knot of hair unmoving. I can't, she said, her voice firm. Marcus is counting on me. The words hit me like a physical blow. Marcus is counting on me. A man she barely knew, a stranger. And he was more important to her than I was. So that's it, I said, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a vast cold emptiness. He's more important than your husband, more important than your marriage. I let out a hollow laugh. All I can say, Nora, is that if you walk out that door tonight, you are kissing our marriage goodbye. It was an ultimatum, and I meant every word of it. It was the last line of defense for the life we had built. Nora just rolled her eyes, the ultimate expression of dismissal. Don't be ridiculous, Caleb. This won't hurt us at all. She turned and headed for the door, her heels clicking a death knell on the hardwood floor. She paused at the threshold, her hand on the doorknob, and called over her shoulder, "Don't wait up." As she reached for the door, I felt something inside me break. A clean, sharp snap, like a bone breaking under pressure. The love, the hope, the future I had envisioned with her, it all shattered in that one final moment of disrespect. "Goodbye, Nora," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. I knew she heard the finality in my tone. She hesitated for a second, her back still to me, her hand frozen on the knob. It was a tiny pause, a split second where she could have turned back. But she didn't. She opened the door and stepped out, pulling it shut behind her. The click of the latch was the sound of the end. I stood there, staring at the closed door, for what felt like hours. Part of me couldn't believe what had just happened. The other part, the brutally honest part, had seen it coming for months. I wandered back to the living room in a daze, my mind racing. Was I overreacting? Maybe. But the Nora I knew, the Nora I had married, would never have done this. She would have understood my fears. She would have stayed home. This new Nora, this stranger in a black dress, was a product of Sabrina's toxic influence. I went to the fridge and grabbed a beer, popping the cap off with more force than necessary. As I took a long, bitter swig, I thought about all the little changes I'd noticed over the past year. It was a slow poisoning, and Sabrina had been administering the dose. I'd overheard snippets of their conversations. Sabrina's voice a venomous whisper in Nora's ear, urging her to live a little, to forget about that fuddy-duddy you're married to. Each time, Nora had laughed it off, saying she loved me too much to ever cheat. But now, Now she was out on a date with another man, dressed like she was looking to impress, and she was at Sabrina's party. The conclusion was inescapable. I spent the next few hours in a haze, alternating between a burning anger, a profound hurt, and a chilling disbelief. By the time midnight rolled around, my mind was made up. I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly wondering, constantly feeling like I was in a competition I didn't even know I was a part of. I was just about to head to bed to try and sleep off the alcohol and the agony when the phone rang. It shrilled through the silent house, an alarm I didn't want to answer. I glanced at the caller ID, and my stomach churned into a tight, sick knot. Sabrina. My hand trembled as I picked up the receiver. Every instinct told me to let it ring, but I had to know. I had to hear the final nail being hammered into the coffin of my marriage. "Hello?" I said, my voice cautious, wary. Sabrina's voice, slurred with alcohol and dripping with triumphant malice, came through the line. "Well, hello there, Caleb. Did I wake you up?" I gritted my teeth. "What do you want, Sabrina?" Her laughter grated on my nerves, a high, piercing sound full of schadenfreude. "Oh, nothing much. Just calling to let you know your wife has finally found herself a real man. A man who can give her what she really needs." My blood ran cold. The beer in my hands suddenly felt like ice. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Just what I said," she replied, her voice practically purring with malicious glee. "Emily's found herself a real man. Here, just listen." Before I could protest, before I could hang up, she held the phone out. The sounds that filled my ear were unmistakable. The rustle of sheets, a man's low groan, and then, clear as day, a sound that would be seared into my memory for eternity. It was Nora's voice, thick with a passion I knew all too well, breathless and ecstatic. "Oh God, yes, take me. Please, harder." I slammed the phone down into its cradle with so much force the plastic cracked. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. This couldn't be happening. Not Nora, not my Nora. But it was. And in that moment, I knew, with a certainty that was absolute and soul-crushing, that our marriage was over. The man she had married was dead. And I, the ghost he left behind, was already packing. The frenzy that seized me after I slammed down the phone was not born of thought. It was a primal, instinctual reaction, the flight response of a mortally wounded animal. The house, our home, suddenly felt like a tomb, every object in it a monument to a lie. The air was thick with betrayal, and I couldn't breathe. There was no methodical packing. There was only a desperate, frantic purge. I moved through the rooms like a whirlwind of grief, ripping clothes from the shared closet, my shirts, my jeans, my suits, and shoving them into a duffel bag. I ignored hers completely, her side of the closet a colorful, fragrant blur that I refused to let my eyes focus on. I tore through the bathroom, grabbing my toothbrush, my razor, my things, leaving her perfumes and lotions standing like silent, mocking soldiers on the marble countertop. In the study, my hands swept across the desk, gathering my personal papers, my laptop, my journals. My fingers brushed against the heavy silver frame on the corner of the desk. It was our wedding photo. Us, on a sun-drenched beach, impossibly young and incandescent, with a naive, boundless joy. Her head was thrown back in laughter, and I was looking at her with an expression of such pure, unadulterated adoration it made my stomach heave. For a moment, I just stared at the smiling faces of two people who no longer existed. Then, with a guttural roar of pure anguish, I snatched the frame and brought it crashing down against the sharp edge of the desk. The glass shattered, exploding in a shower of tiny, glittering shards. The sound was a violent, satisfying release. I left the ruined photo, the smiling face of my wife, now fractured and broken, lying amongst the glass on the floor. It was a fitting epitaph. I worked through the night, fueled by a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and whiskey. I stuffed the duffel bag, a single suitcase, and a box of essential tools from the garage into the back of my truck. I took nothing that was ours. No shared books, no art we'd picked out together, no mementos from our travels. I was performing a surgical amputation, cutting her and the life we'd built out of me with brutal, merciless precision. By the time the first pale, gray light of dawn crept through the windows, I was ready. The frenzied panic of the night had cooled, leaving behind a core of cold, hard resolve. I was no longer an emotional wreck. I was an operative on a mission. The mission was escape. The bank was my first stop. I walked in the moment the doors opened at 9 a.m. and stood before a teller whose cheerful, "Good morning," felt like an insult. I closed our joint savings and checking accounts, transferring my half of the balance into a new, personal account. The process was sterile, procedural, and in its cold efficiency, it was the first official act of our separation. The finality of the transaction receipts in my hand felt more real than any fight we'd ever had. Next, I went to work. My boss, Jake, was a decent man, a gruff but fair 60-year-old who had taken me under his wing. I walked into his office, closed the door, and told him I was quitting, effective immediately. He looked at me over the top of his reading glasses, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. "Everything okay, son?" he asked. I didn't give him the details. I just said, "My marriage is over. I have to leave. Now." The raw, unvarnished pain in my voice must have been enough. He didn't press. He didn't lecture me about giving 2 weeks' notice. He just nodded slowly, his eyes full of a sad understanding. He had the accounting department cut me my final check on the spot, shook my hand firmly, and told me I could use him as a reference anytime. As I left, he simply said, "Good luck, Caleb. I hope you find what you're looking for." My phone had been ringing incessantly since 7 a.m., the screen flashing with Nora's name. Her picture, the one from the beach, a cruel, taunting ghost. Each buzz was a fresh wave of nausea. After leaving Jake's office, I pulled into a gas station, turned the phone off, and looked at it in my hand. It was the last remaining tether. I knew she could probably track the number, maybe even convince the provider to give her my new one if I just changed it. That wasn't good enough. I needed a clean break. I opened the truck door, walked over to a large, grimy dumpster behind the station, and, without a moment's hesitation, I threw the phone in. It landed with a soft, pathetic thud amongst the trash. An hour later, I was at a Walmart, purchasing a cheap, prepaid burner phone. A new number, a new identity, an anonymous ghost. By 10 o'clock that morning, I was on the interstate, heading west with no destination in mind. The only goal was to put miles between me and her, between me and the smoldering ruins of my life. I didn't need to worry about credit cards. We'd always kept our finances separate in that regard. She had her cards, and I had mine. Another small mercy in the midst of the carnage. The first few days were a blur of endless asphalt, cheap motels that smelled of stale smoke and despair, and gas station coffee that tasted like battery acid. Towns and cities bled into one another, their names on the green highway signs meaningless. I was a ship without a rudder, adrift on an ocean of concrete. I drove until I couldn't keep my eyes open, slept for a few hours, and then drove again. I ended up in Stone Creek, Colorado. I don't know why I chose it. Maybe it was the jagged, imposing peaks of the mountains that seemed to stand guard over the town, promising a kind of rugged, unbreachable solitude. It felt far away. It felt different. It felt like a place a man could disappear. I found a job in my field within a week. I rented a small, characterless apartment on the second floor of a brick building with a view of a parking lot, and I began to build the silence. For 2 years, my life was a flat, gray landscape of routine: work, gym, grocery store, home. I spoke to my colleagues about projects and deadlines. I nodded at my neighbors in the hallway. I existed. I ate, I slept, I worked. But I didn't live. I kept everyone at arm's length, deflecting any attempts at friendship with a polite but firm disinterest. I dated a little brief, shallow encounters that ended the moment they threatened to become something more. I was a fortress, and the drawbridge was permanently up. I was safe in my solitude, nursing the phantom limb of a heart that had been amputated. And then, out of the blue, there was Claire. I met her at a local coffee shop where I'd gone to read on a rainy Saturday. I was tucked into a corner, hidden behind a book, and she simply asked if the other chair at my small table was taken. I grunted a no, expecting her to take it and leave me in peace. But she didn't. She commented on the book I was reading. Her voice was warm, like honey and sunshine, a stark contrast to the gray drizzle outside. We started talking, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel the immediate, panicked urge to retreat. Claire was different. She was calm, centered, with a gentle strength that was the antithesis of Sabrina's destructive chaos or Nora's recent frantic energy. There was a quiet sadness in her eyes that I recognized, a shared understanding of some deep, unspoken wound. She didn't push or pry. She didn't ask about my past. She simply accepted the man I was, right there in that moment. She wasn't trying to fix me or solve me. She was just present. And her presence was the first glimmer of light I'd allowed into my world. She slowly, patiently helped me rebuild. Not the life I had lost, but a new one, a better one, a quieter one, built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect, not on grand passions and destructive secrets. With her, the silence was no longer an empty void, but a comfortable, shared peace. The rush of water overflowing the glass in my hand snapped me back to the present. I swore under my breath, shutting off the tap and grabbing a dish towel to wipe up the spill. My heart was hammering again, the memories leaving a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. I dried the glass, my movements slow and deliberate, and turned to look through the kitchen doorway into the living room. Nora was still perched on the edge of the couch, a ghost from another life, a relic from a museum of my own personal history. She looked small and fragile in the vast emptiness of my apartment. And in that moment, I realized the full, terrifying truth. The man who had married her, the man who had loved her with that fierce, all-consuming passion, was well and truly dead. He had died in that house 3 years ago. I was someone else entirely. And this woman, this stranger in my living room, was asking a ghost to come back to life. Holding the cool, smooth glass of water, a simple offering I would have given to any stranger, I walked back toward her, an abyss of 3 years and 1,000 miles separating us. I walked back into the living room and handed the glass to her. Our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second, and I recoiled as if I'd been burned. The contact was electric, a jolt of a long-dead current that I wanted no part of. Nora took the glass with a trembling hand, her knuckles white. She looked up at me, her hazel eyes wide and swimming with a desperate, unshed grief. "Here," I said, my voice gruff, the single word a wall between us. I crossed my arms over my chest, leaning against the doorframe that separated the kitchen from the living area. It was a defensive posture, a physical manifestation of the barricades around my heart. "Now, what do you want?" She took a small, nervous sip of water before speaking. Her gaze dropped to the floor, as if the words she was about to say were too heavy to be spoken, while looking me in the eye. "I want to explain what happened that night, Caleb," she began, her voice barely a whisper, fragile and thin. "It's not what you think." I let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like scraping metal. "Really? Because I think it's pretty clear what happened. You put on your sluttiest dress, went on a date with another man to your train wreck of a best friend's party, and ended up in bed with him. And God knows who else. That was that. End of story." Each word was a stone I threw at her, and I saw them land. Her eyes, when they finally lifted to meet mine, were filled with tears. A single one escaped, tracing a glistening path down her cheek. "No, Caleb," she choked out, shaking her head vehemently, the short bob of her hair swinging around her pale face. "That's not it. I was drugged that night. Someone slipped something into my drink at the party." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs, as if I'd been punched in the gut. The world, which had been sharply in focus, suddenly swam, the edges blurring. Drugged. The word was a foreign object, a piece of a puzzle I didn't know existed. It didn't fit into the neat, tidy narrative of betrayal I had constructed and lived with for 3 years. "What?" I managed to croak, my arms falling to my sides. She nodded, the tears now flowing freely. Her voice was shaky, fractured, as she continued, the story tumbling out of her in a torrent of pain and remembered horror. "I did not go to that party to cheat on you," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength from the conviction of her words. "It was the furthest thing from my mind. I guess maybe I did overdress for the party, but Sabrina asked me to. For some reason, she said she didn't like Marcus, that he was arrogant, but she couldn't tell him not to come because it was an open invitation to everyone in the office. She asked me to dress, revealingly, to let him think he was going to get lucky, to lead him on all night and then shut him down at the end. She said it would be funny, a way to humiliate him. I listened, my body rigid, my mind struggling to process the ugly, twisted logic of it. It sounded exactly like something Sabrina would orchestrate, a cruel, petty game with other people's lives. Nora continued, her gaze distant, lost in the memory of that night. I liked dressing up, so I did it. I didn't think it was a big deal. And Tom, he took one look at me and thought he was going to hit the jackpot that night. He stuck to me like glue, almost like he was afraid that if he wasn't near me, someone else might move in. It was a fun party at first. The music was loud, everyone was dancing. And even though Marcus hovered, I guess the other guys thought I looked hot that night. I danced with several of them. She paused, taking another shaky sip of water, her hand trembling so badly the glass rattled against her teeth. She took a deep, shuddering breath before continuing, her voice dropping even lower. Just as the party was starting to break up, I started feeling dizzy, really dizzy. The room was spinning. I told Sabrina I thought I'd had too much to drink, even though I'd only had 2 glasses of wine all night. She agreed, said I was probably a lightweight. She led me upstairs and had me lie down in one of her spare bedrooms to sleep it off. My stomach churned, a cold, nauseous dread coiling inside me. I wanted to stop her, to tell her I didn't want to hear anymore, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, trapped in the unfolding horror of her story. I needed to know the truth, no matter how ugly. I don't know how or when it started, she whispered. Her eyes squeezed shut as if to block out the images in her own head. But I slowly became aware that I was being made love to. And my stomach turned as I listened to her words. In the fog, I thought I was home, in our bed, with you. Her voice broke on the last word, a raw, ragged sob. The image was so vivid, so grotesque, it made me feel physically ill. I thought it was you, she repeated, her voice barely audible, until I heard someone say, "Hurry it up, Pete. You're next." My eyes flew open. The room was dark, but not dark enough. I could see shapes, silhouettes of people standing around the bed. And I saw her. I saw Sabrina standing by the door. And Tom was there, and another guy from my office, Ben Grady. I saw several other guys standing around without clothes on. One of them, the one they called Pete, was the one who was supposed to be next. Her eyes finally met mine, and what I saw in them was a desperate plea for understanding, for belief. You know me, Caleb. You know how I get when we make love. I lose it. I become just a vessel of pleasure. I don't know how many. I don't know how many men did me before I finally passed out. I felt sick. The image of Nora, my Nora, being passed around like that, it was almost more than my mind could bear. It was a violation so profound, so monstrous, that it defied comprehension. But I forced myself to listen, to bear witness to the confession she had carried alone for 3 years. She continued her story, her voice hollow, stripped of all emotion, as if she were reciting a police report about someone else. I woke up the next morning. I was naked, under a scratchy blanket, and a man was lying next to me, Bob Flanagan, from accounting. He was leaning on one elbow, just looking at me. I'll never forget the look on his face. He was smiling. I asked him what happened. He said, "Just never thought you would cheat on Caleb. Glad that you did, though. Hope to see more of you." I promptly slapped him across the face as hard as I could. Then I scrambled to find my clothes, got dressed, and headed straight to the hospital. She took another sip of water, her hand shaking slightly. I told the emergency room staff that I thought I had been given a date rape drug. They did the testing, and they found traces of Rohypnol and ecstasy in my blood. Then they called the cops. A tidal wave of emotions washed over me, a chaotic, violent storm of anger, guilt, and utter confusion. Anger at Sabrina, at Marcus, at every single man in that room, and a sharp, piercing guilt that stabbed at me like a shard of glass. I had left her to deal with this alone. "Why didn't you call me?" I asked, my voice rough, torn from my throat. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and raw. "I tried," she said, her voice breaking. "While I was at the hospital, waiting for the police, waiting for the test results, I tried calling you over and over again. But it went straight to voicemail every time. I found out why when I finally got home and found you gone." She took another shuddering breath, the memory of that second devastation clear on her face. When the police talked to me, I told them what I knew and what little I remembered. The first one they talked to was Flanagan. He told them he had no idea I was drugged. He said he thought nothing of taking me because that's what always happened at Sabrina's parties. He said that I knew it, that I had even stood around and watched before. He said he figured I had finally decided to give it a try. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling overwhelmed, the foundations of my anger beginning to crack. Jesus, Nora, I had no idea. She nodded, tears streaming down her face again. The police thought that Marcus had to be part of what happened to me. When they leaned on him, he rolled over immediately. He told them it was all Sabrina's doing. She just knew that I really wanted to join in, so she decided to give me a push. She figured that once the drugs wore off, I'd still be into it, that I'd love it and want to do it again. Nora's voice suddenly hardened, a sliver of steel entering her tone. She was right about one thing. In that state, I did love it. But where she screwed up was she didn't pay any attention to the fact that I told her over and over again that I would never join in without you, that you had to be on board with it, or I wouldn't do it. My head was spinning. This was so much to take in, so horrifically different from the simple, clean-cut story of infidelity I'd clung to. So, what did you do then? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. After the police, the hospital, all of that, a policeman drove me home, she continued, her voice steady now, as if recounting the facts gave her a sense of control. That's when I found out why I never got an answer when I tried calling you. I saw the empty closet, the space on your desk where your laptop used to be, the shattered wedding photo on the floor. I broke down. I cried for 2 days straight, right there on the floor of the study. Another pang of guilt, sharper this time. If only I had stayed. If only I had answered her calls. After that, she went on, I got an attorney. I sued everyone who had been at that party and who had done me. She stumbled over the words, and I could see the fresh pain in her eyes. Most of the suits were thrown out because they all told the same story Flanagan had told. But the suits against Sabrina and Marcus were valid because the two of them had conspired against me. I leaned forward, my defensive posture forgotten, intrigued despite myself. What happened with the lawsuits? A small, bitter smile touched Nora's lips. I won. But Sabrina had nothing but her house. So, I was asked if I would settle for it. She still owed about $300,000 on it, but with the settlement I got from Marcus, I was able to pay it off. Then I sold it. I nodded slowly, processing this new information. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture that was both horrifying and, in its own terrible way, logical. And that's how you found me, I stated, the realization dawning on me. You used the money from the sale to hire a private investigator. Yes, Nora confirmed, her eyes locking onto mine, clear and determined. Once I had the money from the sale of the house, I hired the best private detective I could find. And here I am. We sat in silence for a long moment, the air thick with the weight of her story. The awful truth lay between us, a grotesque and undeniable thing. It explained everything, and it changed nothing. The silence that descended upon the room was heavier than anything I had ever known. It was filled with the ghosts of the past 3 years. Her trauma, my anger, the vast empty space where our marriage used to be. The story she had told was a horror show, a narrative of such profound violation that it almost defied belief. A part of me, a deep human part, felt a wave of profound sympathy for her. No one deserved to go through that, no one. But as the initial shock began to recede, it was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The facts had changed, but the core of the problem, the genesis of the entire catastrophe, remained the same. Finally, I broke the silence. My voice was low, stripped of the earlier harshness, but firm with a conviction that her story, as terrible as it was, hadn't shaken. You wasted your money on the PI, Nora, I said, my gaze unflinching. All that time, all that effort it took you to get here. For what? To get us back together? Her eyes, still shimmering with tears, met mine. They were filled with a desperate, heartbreaking mixture of hope and determination. It was a look I recognized, the look she got when she was convinced she could fix anything through sheer force of will. I love you, Caleb, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I belong with you. I shook my head slowly, a surge of frustration cutting through the pity I felt for her. How could she not see it? How could she sit here, after everything, and still believe it was that simple? You would have been smarter to have spent your money on an attorney to get you a divorce, I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. You could have used abandonment as grounds. I didn't want a divorce, Caleb, she insisted, her voice rising. I wanted to find you. I wanted to tell you the truth. What you want or don't want doesn't matter to me anymore, Nora, I said, and the hardness was back in my voice, a shield I pulled around myself. I made my choice 3 years ago. But it wasn't my fault, she pleaded, leaning forward on the couch, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. I didn't do it willingly, Caleb. I was drugged. I ran a hand through my hair, the old anger and the deep, abiding hurt bubbling up from the place I had buried them. But you did willingly walk out that door, I countered, my voice rising to match hers. You did that of your own free will. I stood right there, in our home, and I begged you not to go. I told you what it would mean. I told you, if you walked out that door, you were kissing your marriage goodbye. You ignored me, you rolled your eyes at me, and you walked out. I took a step towards her, my finger jabbing the air between us. The way I left should have told you everything. The empty closets, the cleaned-out bank accounts, the disconnected phone. Those weren't the actions of a man who was waiting for an explanation. They were the actions of a man who was done. You would be wasting your time and your money to get here. Her face crumpled, the hope draining from it like water from a sieve. I have to be here, she sobbed. If I'm going to put us back together, I have to be here. A flash of pure, unadulterated irritation shot through me. She wasn't listening. She still wasn't listening. It was the same fundamental flaw, the same willful deafness that had destroyed us. You aren't paying any more attention to what I'm saying now than you did on the evening you walked out on me, I said, my voice sharp and clear, each word a carefully aimed dart. So, pay attention now, Nora. I don't want you. You can't put us back together because there is no us. I do not, and I emphasize, do not want to get back together with a woman who could do what you did. Damn it, Caleb, she cried, her frustration finally boiling over. She shot to her feet, the forgotten glass of water tumbling from her lap and hitting the cheap rug with a dull, muffled thud. Can't you understand? I did not do it of my own free will. I was drugged. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check, trying to make her see the chasm that lay between her perception of the problem and mine. You are the one who is not understanding things, Nora, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. It isn't what happened to you at Sabrina's party. Although I did expect something like that to happen, and I warned you it was likely to. The issue, the real issue, the one that ended our marriage, is what you did before you walked out the door to go to Sabrina's. It was the total, utter disrespect for me and for our vows that you showed before you left for your date. Your words, Nora. Don't be ridiculous, Caleb. This won't hurt us at all. As you walked out that door to go on a date with another man that killed any us that could have been. She opened her mouth to argue, to protest again, her face a mask of disbelief and pain. But I cut her off. I couldn't do this anymore. I was done relitigating the past. Now, please leave, I said, my voice flat, final. I need to get ready for dinner. I'm hungry. I'll eat with you, Nora said quickly, desperately, latching onto the smallest of openings. We can talk. I'm going to convince you. I'm going to convince you that you're wrong when you say we can't put things back together. Her words had barely faded into the tense silence of the room when the sound of a key turning in the front door lock made us both freeze. The door swung open, and a voice, bright and warm and full of life, called out, I'm home, babe. I managed to catch an earlier flight. What's for dinner? Claire walked in, dropping her weekender bag by the door and pulling off a light trench coat. She was radiant, her blonde hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, her face flushed from the autumn chill. She looked up, a brilliant smile on her face, and then she saw Nora. The smile faltered. She paused, her coat halfway off her shoulders, her blue eyes darting from my rigid, stone-like expression to the tear-streaked face of the strange woman standing in the middle of our living room. The air in the room, already thick with tension, became instantly, suffocatingly tight. It was a tableau of the past colliding violently with the present. Oh, Claire said, her voice soft with surprise. Who's this? I cleared my throat, the sound unnaturally loud. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. Claire, this is Nora, I said, my voice strained. You've heard me speak of her a time or two. I then turned my gaze to Nora, whose face had gone deathly pale. "Nora, this is Claire." To my utter astonishment, a strange, beatific smile spread across Claire's face. She dropped her coat onto a chair, walked directly over to Nora, bent down slightly, and gave her a brief, gentle hug. "Thank you," Claire said, her voice warm and sincere, as she pulled back. "Thank you for sending Caleb to me." Nora looked utterly shell-shocked, as if she'd been struck. She stood frozen, speechless, staring at this kind, beautiful woman who had just thanked her for unwittingly destroying her own marriage. Claire turned back to me, her smile returning, seemingly oblivious to the emotional wreckage in the room. "So, what's for dinner?" she asked again, her tone light and cheerful. "I thought we would go out," I replied, my voice hoarse. "I made reservations at Angelo's." "Nice," Claire beamed. "I'll go change." She gave Nora another quick, friendly hug before heading towards the bedroom. "It was so nice meeting you, Nora. Maybe we can get together sometime and compare notes." The moment Claire disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door behind her, Nora turned to me, her face a pale, taut mask of disbelief and fury. "Does she know?" Nora hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "Does she know you're still married?" "She does," I nodded, my jaw tight. Nora's chin set in a look of stubborn, defiant determination that I knew all too well. "You need to let her know," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation, "that she is never going to win. She needs to back off. Because I am going to fight for you, Caleb." The three of them, past, present, and the battleground between them, were all in my apartment. The air was thick with the unspoken, with the impossible. And I was standing right in the middle of the storm. I sighed, a deep, weary exhalation that felt like it came from the soles of my feet. The fight had gone out of me, replaced by a profound sense of exhaustion and a strange, detached pity for the woman standing before me. She was a ghost, rattling chains in a house that was no longer hers, and she couldn't even see the new occupants. "Get real, Nora," I said, my voice softer now, not out of kindness, but out of sheer fatigue. "For you to fight for me, you would need to spend time with me. And that just isn't going to happen. The battle was over 3 years ago. You just didn't hear the ceasefire." I walked over to the front door and opened it, a clear, unambiguous dismissal. "Get a divorce," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "Find yourself another man. And when you do find him, don't ever pull the stunt on him that you pulled on me. Don't ever treat his love and his trust like they're disposable." Tears were sliding down her cheeks again, silent, glistening tracks of defeat. "Damn it, Caleb," she whispered, her voice thick and broken. "Why can't you understand? I did not cheat on you. I was drugged." My patience, already worn to a thread, finally snapped. "So what?" I said, my voice rising, sharp and final. "You had to be there in order to be drugged. And that is the point. That has always been the point. I told you not to go. I begged you. I told you, when you opened the door to leave, that if you left, you were kissing your marriage goodbye. You ignored me. You left. Marriage over. It is as simple as that." She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, as the finality of my words finally seemed to penetrate the wall of her denial. The truth wasn't that I didn't believe her story. It was that her story didn't matter. The wound she was trying to heal was not the wound that had killed us. Her voice, when she spoke again, was thick with a desperate, last-ditch defiance. "I'm not going to divorce you, Caleb," she said, lifting her chin. "And you need to let your girlfriend know that. She is never going to be able to marry you." I couldn't help it. A laugh escaped me, a short, bitter, ironic sound. The sheer, tragic absurdity of it all was almost too much to bear. "Marry me?" I repeated, shaking my head. "She can't marry me. She's already married." Nora's eyes widened in confusion. "And she's in the same boat I'm in," I continued, spelling it out for her. "Her husband won't give her a divorce. He's holding on out of spite, hoping to make her miserable. So she won't waste the money or the energy trying to get one through the courts. We've accepted it. We have each other. That's all that matters." The last pillar of her desperate hope crumbled. The realization that I had found a mirror of my own situation, a partner who understood my limbo because she was living in it too, was the final, fatal blow. She saw, in that moment, that Claire wasn't a placeholder. She was the destination. Nora stood up, her legs looking shaky and unsure beneath her. She walked towards the door, a woman defeated, her shoulders slumped. "I'll go," she said, her voice hollow. "But I'm not going far. I can't get you back long distance. So, I'm moving here. I am going to get you back." It was a pathetic, reflexive threat, the last gasp of a fight that was already lost. I shook my head, feeling nothing but a deep, sorrowful finality. "No, you aren't, Nora," I said, my voice gentle but absolute. "I've already said this several times, and you need to get it through your head that I mean it. I do not want you. Now go." She was crying openly as she walked past me and out into the hallway, a quiet, broken sound that echoed in the space she left behind. I watched her go, a ghost fading back into the past. Then, I closed the door, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt the lock click into place, not as an act of fear, but as an act of peace. I leaned against the door for a moment, my eyes closed, just breathing. The scent of her perfume still lingered faintly in the air, but it was already starting to fade, being replaced by the familiar, comforting scent of my own home. A moment later, the bedroom door opened. Claire came out, looking radiant in a simple black dress that I loved. She had a questioning look on her face. "Why aren't you ready?" she asked. "Did you decide not to go?" I shook my head, a slow smile spreading across my face. It felt real. It felt earned. "No, it just took longer to get rid of her than I thought." "Is she gone for good?" Claire asked, raising an eyebrow. She walked over to me, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "She should be," I said, reaching out and taking her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. Her skin was warm, solid, real. I let her know, in no uncertain terms, that I wanted nothing to do with her. A genuine, brilliant smile lit up Claire's face. "That's good," she said softly, squeezing my hand, "because I do not intend to let you get away from me." Her face softened, her blue eyes full of a love that was calm, steady, and unconditional. "And I have no intention of going anywhere," I replied, my voice thick with an emotion I wasn't afraid to feel anymore. I leaned in and kissed her, a deep, lingering kiss that was a promise and a prayer all in one. It was a kiss that tasted of the future, not the past. "Now hurry up and get ready," she said, playfully pushing me towards the bedroom. "I'm starving." As I headed to the bedroom to change, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of relief, as if a great weight I didn't even realize I was still carrying had finally been lifted from my shoulders. The past was behind me. It was a tragic, ugly story, but it was over. And I had a future to look forward to, with a woman who had seen the broken pieces of me and had loved me anyway. Nora might think she was going to fight for me, but she was fighting a battle that had already been lost, on a field where I no longer stood. I paused at the bedroom door and looked back at Claire, who was humming to herself as she flipped through a magazine on the coffee table, waiting for me. The picture of domestic, simple peace was so beautiful it almost hurt. Yeah, I thought to myself, a feeling of deep, unwavering certainty settling in my soul. I've got everything I need right here.